Hark! It's an 87th Precinct podcast. This is the only podcast in the world dedicated to Ed McBain's seminal series of police procedurals, which began in 1956 with Cop Hater and ended in 2005 with Fiddlers. There were 55 books in the series, and today's podcast looks at book number 43, Widows. My name is Paul Abbott, and to review the book, I'm joined by Mr. Stephen Royston.
Hello.
And Mr. Morgan Brown.
Hello there.
And we're obviously still having to do this remotely because we're now fully into Lockdown 3, the revenge of the son of Lockdown.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know what status people are listening around the world are in, but, as usual, I hope you're safe and well and all that sort of stuff. It's strange to be locked down in the middle of winter, but...
sequels go. It's a really crap one, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a boring third sequel.
Yep.
Which nothing happens.
So anyway, I do want to say a very special thank you to anyone who has reached out to us on our email, which is hark87podcast@gmail.com, or through the Facebook, Instagram or Twitter pages, or has bought us a gift at coffee.com, ko-fi.com. We've recently had some very nice messages and some very generous comments and gifts through coffee, and it does really make the project worthwhile, especially during this very mad period that we're all going through. So, please do keep in touch. It means a great deal to us. And also, this is kind of breaking news in a way. We'd like to say a massive congratulations to our friend Erin MacDonald, the author of the Ed McBain Evan Hunter companion book, who I did an interview podcast with for the show. She's been nominated for an Edgar Award for her new book about Ian Rankin's work.
Fantastic.
So that's brilliant. That's a huge thing for anyone involved in mystery and crime. To be nominated for an Edgar is amazing. So well done, Erin.
It's fantastic news, yeah.
It is great news. I only found out today, and it means that instead of just writing about people who've been nominated for Edgars, she is now an Edgar-nominated writer herself. So that's great.
That's terrific.
Yeah. Okay. So we've reached 1991. We've reached book number 43, which is Widows. And I suppose we better get into, a bit of 1991 context before I get into stuff about McBain and the book, really, because I've got a few little bits and pieces. 1991, again, another year that feels like yesterday, but was actually quite a long time ago.
It was.
Yeah. So, I did dig out a few little things from 1991 in terms of what happened during the year. I mean, there was a lot going on in 1991, not least the Gulf War.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the first major conflict I can remember anyway. One of the first major conflicts to have total coverage on the news more than ever before.
Yeah, the sort of proper rolling kind of the modern news era, isn't it? I guess the first time that really happened.
So that's one of the fun things that's happening in 1991. I'll start though with something on the 16th of January 1991, and that is that the final phase of the M40 motorway was opened.
Wow!
Do love a good bit of infrastructure.
Date for your diaries, that, isn't it?
Do you know where the M40 connects, Steve?
The M40 connects... does the M40 go like Coventry to London?
Yeah, West Midlands. The West Midlands conurbation. Well done. Some motorway points for you.
Well, driven up and down them all at some point. Not aimlessly, kind of going somewhere. Just hither and thither.
Yeah, hither and yon. Right, well, we'll move on to the 26th of February, in which Tim Berners-Lee introduces the first ever web browser, and that year also sees the first web page go online, which was just a basic page on the CERN website. Well, what was the very first website, the CERN page. You can actually find it online still. It's literally just a list of, this is the internet, the World Wide Web. This is what it is. Cool. So that's 26th of February 1991. So that's an important day. And fast forward to 2021, and we've got, TikTok, where you can watch a dog whistling into a toy, like I sent you both a link to before. That's good. Less amusing, though, but relevant really in terms of the context of the books and going forward, is on the 3rd of March is in LA, it's the beating of Rodney King, which was obviously perpetrated by some LA police officers. And that's an important thing to mention historically, and certainly for discussing going forward books that deal with crime in cities anyway.
Indeed.
But we jump to the 2nd of June, and just, again, for the purposes of infrastructure, I would like to announce that on the 2nd of June 1991, Seacat catamarans were introduced on the Dover to Calais hover speed route.
Oh, well, they got rid of the hovercrafts.
Yeah, they changed them to catamarans.
What an awful day.
Yeah, it's the beginning of the end. And then it's amazing how the second half of the year basically is taken up with the dissolution of the Soviet Union.
It did. That finished at Christmas time, I think.
Yeah, so we have Boris Yeltsin becoming president of the SFSR in the 12th of June. And then it snowballs from there, essentially, doesn't it? And
I think there was the coup that year, the attempt to do a coup.
Yeah, I believe so.
During August. I remember I was on holiday in Greece. I remember it well.
Lots of news happening in 1991, because we also had the end of apartheid in South Africa on the 17th of June. Crime-wise, 22nd of July, Jeffrey Dahmer is arrested for fans of insane serial killers.
Yeah.
And, essentially the rest of my year is marked out as basically being Soviet Union stops. And yeah, so there we go. It's a busy year in 1991, the year into which this book is launched. It comes out in it's copyright 2nd of January 1991, so it's written pre most of this stuff happening. Let's find out what was going on for McBain at the time. Not much. It's Widows is his only book in 1991. But on the 15th of October 1991, Skladacha, the Czech adaptation of Jigsaw, is aired.
Cool.
And we would have talked about that back on the Jigsaw episode. And the only other thing that's mentioned is that Evan Hunter has an IMDb reference for this year, because for 3 years running in the early 90s, Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger, presented the Horror Hall of Fame, which was presumably like an awards ceremony, like an academy for horror things.
Yeah.
They only ran to 3 of them, but in the Horror Hall of Fame 2, which was 1991, The Birds was inducted as one of the, this gets a special award because it's a classic horror film. And so Evan Hunter is listed on the IMDb because he's there, not at the ceremony, but at he's included in a film clip in it there anyway.
I wonder how Robert Englund opened the envelopes to the winners. Just shredded paper everywhere. Perhaps that's why they canned it after 3 years, because it just went on too long.
Yeah, try to stick it all back together afterwards.
Yeah. And the winner is... Oh, shit.
Yeah. But I think what's interesting, though, is that even though he doesn't actually attend the ceremony, the whole ceremony, which is on YouTube, opens with a parody of the scene in Birds where the school teacher is sat on the bench and the birds gather on the apparatus behind her, the playground stuff. But it's Robert Englund there, and it's playing the song Risseldy Rosseldy, which is the kids' tune that Evan Hunter gets royalties for because he wrote it as an original song credited to his name. So he would have been very happy that they did that parody at the start, because it would have given him a massive check for royalties for Risseldy Rosseldy from the Birds.
Amazing.
So there you go. He would have appreciated that anyway. I'm just looking down the list of what else went into the Horror Hall of Fame too. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was inducted.
Fantastic.
The comics publisher EC Comics.
Oh,
Don't know what they do. What sort of thing did they do?
Well, I think they did some of the kind of sort of horror anthology series. I'm trying to think which. I can't even remember, but some of the kind of horror comics that the likes of Creepshow and things were based on. Sort of thing as well, to associate with them.
Fair enough. Bela Lugosi is inducted.
Wonderful.
Roger Corman, who is gets the producer-director, inducted as producer-director, is presented by William Shatner.
God, what a night that must have been.
That's a combo, isn't it? William Shatner giving Roger Corman an award.
I think the reason it only ran for a few years is because they peaked so early that there was nowhere else to go by the sounds of things.
Yeah.
You've got to keep the powder dry on some of your loons, haven't you? You can't get them all out at the second showing.
And it was co-hosted by the Crypt Keeper animatronic, I think.
sounds magnificent.
Yeah, indeed.
We need one of those bring back. What's Robert Englund up to these days? He's still alive, isn't he?
Yeah, I think he's probably still around. I occasionally see him posing on Elvira's Twitter feed or Instagram pages, because Elvira's a good follow on all social media, very, very funny. And lots of pictures of her with these famous horror alumni anyway. So anyway, let's move on from this horror madness to some... Oh, I mean, it's not like Widows isn't entirely horror-free, let's say. But let's get stuck in. And I'll open with the dedication, and then we'll have a little think about the book. Dedicated to Jane Powell and Dick Moore. And, yeah, these are both quite famous people. So Dick Moore was also known as Dickie Moore, who was born in 1925, died in 2015. Who was an actor who first appeared in silent film. So that's
cool.
Quite a thing, because he appeared as a baby in things in the 20s.
I was just going to say, I suppose that would be a silent role, really, wouldn't it? You wouldn't have many lines, but...
Yeah. Later appeared in a series of films made by Hal Roach, who was the Laurel and Hardy guy, wasn't he? He made a load of films called Our Gang, which were kids starring comedies. And he was apparently the first person to give Shirley Temple a romantic on-screen kiss.
Oof.
So that's quite the legacy.
Quite.
And his wife, who was his third wife, was Jane Powell, who's still alive. She was born in 1929, who was a singer, actor and dancer in a lot of MGM musicals.
Yeah, I thought I recognised the name, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers and the like.
Yes, yeah, that's
Tremendous.
it. It looked to me like she sort of always played second best friend to the main star type thing. But yeah, she certainly had a storied career, and they got together at some point. And were clearly good friends of Evan Hunter. They lived in Manhattan and in Connecticut, so that's same circles as usual. So there you go. We know who those people are. Right. Let us get to Widows. I will just check in. It was my first time reading it. First time for anyone else?
No, I'd read it before.
Second time through for me as well.
Oh, okie dokie. So it's just me who's the newbie to this one. Initial thoughts then, Steve. What was your recollection of it or feelings towards it?
Well, as you know, I can never remember. Well, that's not true, but yeah, quite a few. This was another one that I couldn't particularly remember much of whatsoever. Perhaps that's because I don't think I was a big fan first time round, and I wasn't a big fan second time round, really.
Right.
Would be my overriding impression. But that's not to say it doesn't have its moments. But, the central story being the... Should we start discussing the plot? Or
yes, go for it.
Being the murder of a chain of people who are involved with one another, mistresses and wives and other mistresses, and the central character, this... Arthur Schumacher as well, this old geezer. I think the biggest flaw in the book is you could not give a toss about any of that. I thought. And it therefore just made the book reasonably dull in that respect, I thought. And yet, obviously, it is, well, not obviously, but it is another of those where he has numerous plates spinning, and yet the other strains with Eileen and Bert were very well done, I thought, and quite interesting. So a book of two halves.
I totally agree. Like, I'd remembered this quite well in some respects, but I'd forgotten the main plot completely. But I did remember all the stuff with Carella's family, and as you say, the Eileen and Bert stuff as well. And it kind of came as a surprise to me that those weren't the main things, really.
The other thing as well is even the bit with Carella and his family and his father, I don't think really delivered what you were kind of meant. Because ultimately, right, we've not heard about Carella's father for about 50 years, I reckon, at this point. It's probably the 1950s. No, but seriously, isn't it? It must be 30 years, 25 years since he's been in any of the books. And so therefore it was difficult to like buy into that kind of as much as you were supposed to as well.
Well, I mean, the thing that it harks back to is Till Death, which is 1959 that comes out.
Which I don't think I like that one either, did I?
No, I don't think we scored Till Death very high.
So,
in fact, I can probably tell you how we scored it.
Yeah, I seem to remember that.
Oh, we gave it 69 overall on our Kenneth system.
That would have probably low for an early entry, that, I think.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, just I don't know. I found it a bit of a funny read, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think what you both say echoes my feelings about it coming to it new as well. It is, as you say, we've got what is supposedly the central plot, which is these string of victims associated with Arthur Schumacher, someone we don't know and don't care about. But then there are these other strands as well. The stuff about Eileen sort of breaking away from Bert finally and having her own proper story is very well done, I think. I think it makes a difference to the character. You know, there's a certain amount of interest to be had with the fact that the investigation of, well, I suppose we better say it up front, because anyone listening will know this by now, is that Carella's father is killed in the book, off screen, as it were. And we have to sort of, us and him have to leave the investigation to these cops from the 4-5 in Riverhead. And so we have another parallel world of police work going on in every other chapter, or bits in every chapter, whatever it is, which is interesting because it's another part of the city. Yeah, it's a different, well, it's another a way of discussing the racial makeup in the city, or the treatment of particularly black people in the city in the early 90s, by giving black cops the opportunity to pursue black perpetrators. Yeah, so that's interesting as well. And it's got little shades, I think, of tiny little shades of like Chester Himes-ness about it there. Not much, but he sort of has two quite significant, interesting-looking black cops in a black neighbourhood.
Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of Coffinhead and Gravedigger, just a hint, isn't there?
Yeah, which helps to contrast with Carella at the end, anyway, which we'll get to when we get there. And yeah, so it's an interesting one. I think some of it's really impactful and clearly has an important thing in its setting up for future books. But otherwise the central plot is a bit, well, some dirty old man gets shot.
Yeah, you see, it was no doubt intentional, maybe like a kind of a comment on New York at the time, where he's clearly got a lot of characters who were like killed off, and there's just a series of really selfish people, aren't they? Just one after the other, really, and therefore you don't because you don't feel any sympathy with any of them, even at all, really, which is terrible given that they're murdered in fairly ruthless fashion. There's not much suspense there, really, and there's not much, because you're just reading it thinking, well, it's just going to be one of these people, and surprise, surprise, it is one of the people that you've met in the book, and it's just like, oh, right, well,
one of these thoroughly unlikable people is slightly more unlikable than the rest.
Yeah, and he's just going around killing a load of other unlikable people, and it's just like, all right, fair enough. Which is a shame because, as I say, the other plots were very interesting.
No, I've made a few notes as from how it starts out. I'll tell you what's interesting though, and I think this has happened since the book Lullaby. Certainly, we open at the first crime scene, the first murder scene of Susan Brower, a girl we don't know who she's connected to or whatever, and Monaghan and Monroe are there, but they're picking at each other, they're sniping at each other again.
Trouble in Paradise. They've
not been quite the same, have they? So. Yeah, since he started making one of them more emotional than the other, he's starting to play with their relationship a little bit, which is interesting. And I mean, whatever we say about it, it's not to say this book isn't chock full of stuff. Because if I've got on my notes here, Monaghan Monroe, the original murder scene, we've got Eileen Burke taking up a role in a hostage negotiation team.
Yep.
We've got a string of erotic letters. We've got Hawes and O'Brien arguing who can tell Carella his father is dead. And we've also obviously got the surrounding thing of Carella's father being killed and him having to talk to his family. This is all chapter 1.
It's certainly packed with stuff. Definitely, it's not boring, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, we should probably talk about the title, actually. That's something that's worth mentioning, because it's called Widows. And obviously, we've got the widow in the sense of Carella's mother is left a widow. There's a sort of emotional widowing for Carella's sister in this.
There is.
Then obviously...
There's an actual widow, but they call themselves grass widows, don't they?
Yeah.
Which is a phrase I've never heard before.
No, me either. And I didn't bother to look into it either. So it'll have to remain a mystery unless Morgan knows what it means.
I don't really, and I did mean to look into it, and I completely failed to. Yeah, it's an odd one, isn't it?
Hang on. A grass widow is a woman whose husband is away often or for a prolonged period. So there we go.
I don't know if that really actually applies to the people to whom it's applied to in the book, but...
No. Anyway, it trundles along. You have a body count piling up with the main story, and I think I can't get away from this, though, that, like Steve says, you don't really care about these people. It's interesting them try to track family down and having to do that legwork stuff that the books rely on to be what they are, procedural aspects of it. But yeah, your attention is always totally drawn to what's happening with Carella and really what's happening with Eileen Burke, which I think is a very good move, putting her into hostage negotiation. How did you find those bits?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I think that's an excellent move. There's some great scenes. Her first sort of time out in the field is excellent with the old guy, and she becomes quite the hero and then gets reprimanded for it.
Yeah. So it's an interesting way for him to address sexism as well, isn't it? Because it's this guy who just keeps like reprimanding all the good female people on his team. And that's interesting. I didn't twig at all, really. I didn't put the pieces together that this was somehow going to end up as part of the denouement with Carella. But I think that came along quite nicely. I like the way they sort of dovetailed together at the end.
Yeah, that's by far the best, most interesting thing. It's like a proper big, almost cinematic finale, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely.
With all the strains of all pulled together, really, and like the big kind of stakeout and snipers and helicopters,
and the cutting between the different groups, and
So that bit was really good, and so it does end with a really good finale, definitely. But that's kind of when the main plot. It's just such a shame that the main plot kind of dominates as it does, because he's done this in the past where he has a number of plots and will give them like equal measure, but in this one the main plot of the Arthur Schumacher and the murders does seem to dominate the page count, or it certainly seems that way to me anyway.
I think it's whether it does or not, I couldn't say. But certainly
not.
Your focus is on it, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But that's interesting. You're entirely right about that end bit, though. I think the book is worth reading for the way it finishes off. It's absolutely, a testament to his skill as a thriller writer as much as anything, that the way it plays out at the end.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
And the fact that he's managed to get Eileen Burke into this situation, and also that he brings in quite a lot of relevant stuff to the time in which the book is set. So he has a character called the Preacher in there who's around whipping up crowds and things like that, who, as best as I can tell, really is the Reverend Al Sharpton.
Yes, I assumed that was kind of who they were basing that on.
Well, there's definitely a character like that in the Chester Himes, but I think he's even in more than one.
Yeah.
And is he even called the Preacher as well? He'd be called something similar. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not going to speak to sort of Al Sharpton's history, but obviously Reverend Al Sharpton is a very famous civil rights activist, and particularly interested in sort of the attitudes towards the black community in New York. And so he was around for a lot of the stuff that was happening in New York, including another thing that's mentioned, because the preacher keeps going on about no more jogger justice. And that's referring to a case where a woman was beaten and raped in Central Park. And of course, the first thing that happens is they round up all the black people nearby. And this is a real thing that happened in the real world. And Al Sharpton was involved in sort of the campaign for justice for that. And that played out over several years until it ended up with the city having to pay damages to the people they'd arrested. And I won't go into detail about that because it's very it's very depressing for everyone involved, really. But I'm going to mention this just because of its contemporaneousness to now, in fact, that when all this stuff was happening in New York in 1989, 1990, that sort of time, which was a very lawless time for the city. It had the highest crime rates it had for years. That was when Donald Trump had first started we should have more death penalties. So he goes from being just this businessman to starting writing open letters in newspapers saying we should have the death penalty for people like these.
Is this the Central Park 5?
Yes, it is the Central Park 5.
That's the one, yeah. And then they were eventually, the DNA evidence completely acquitted them.
Yeah, and the city had to pay $41 million to them. Yeah.
Is there a Netflix documentary about this?
I believe there might be, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's for almost every crime that's been committed now, so it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just funny as I was doing my research, having just got Donald J. Trump out of office, having pushed forward a string of executions in prison. That you go back and you're looking through your research for this, and you incidentally come across him at this time screaming for the death penalty for these people,
taking out full page ads in national newspapers to press for the death penalty without any sort of particular evidence. Yeah, vile.
Yeah, classic Trump.
Yeah. Oh, and we know that McBain didn't like Trump. If you go on the evidence of how he side eyes him in the book Downtown, anyway. And says, no one's called Donald Trump. That's a stupid name. We know that McBain was certainly not a Republican anyway. Let's put it that way.
Indeed.
But anyway, that's the real world intruding onto the world of the 87th Precinct in this fantastic final sequence, which is both tense and grim and takes us back as well to another old book, which is Lady, Lady, I Did It, because at the end, Carella comes face to face with one of the people who killed his father. And he's got the opportunity to
administer his own justice.
But the difference between Carella and Kling is huge. So whereas Lady, Lady, I Did It is the start of Kling's collapse as a human being, because he does pummel this guy to near death. Anyway, here Carella... God, can you imagine if he'd have written that Carella actually killed this guy?
Yeah.
Would have changed the tone of the rest of the series, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been terrifying.
Yeah,
but what he does is he makes Carella even more the moral cop that we know he is. He's in the hardest situation in his life, and he's got to deal with this. So
yeah, rather than turning it into James Elroy's 87th Precinct.
Yeah, loads of totally corrupt cops.
Yeah, absolutely everyone deeply just sort of morally bankrupt, and
No, but so the finale is definitely the high point of the book, actually, which is quite nice if it comes to the end. So it keeps you going. But I must admit, to kind of, because it does wind up the earlier plot quite early, and you're just thinking, I wonder what's going to occupy all these pages at the end, and obviously it's that.
Yeah. Yes, it is, and it's worth reading to get to that. I mean, in terms of 87th Precinctness, it's a bit hard to tell. It's procedural. There's none of the massive tropes of the series particularly, but there is a couple of nice references like Willis talking about time moving like molasses in the precinct, and my other thing that I've noticed in this. Actually, one thing that I think I've mentioned a couple of times is McBain's obsession with red-haired, green-eyed Irish girls. And so in this, he gives Carella a recollection to like his first proper sexual experiences with this girl who's like the ultimate red-haired, green-eyed Irish girl. And it must have been a thing from McBain's life, because they're in almost every book.
Yeah, he does seem to have a particular fascination, doesn't he? So, yeah, it seems likely.
So I assume there's a few little hints and tips to the story of McBain's own life, because like if something's taking place in Riverhead, that's the Bronx, isn't it? And that's where he grew up after leaving Harlem. And there's one bit, actually, where he mentions about Carella's talking about his dad going off in an ambulance after a heart attack. Now, we're 2 years or so down the line from McBain's first heart attack, and he's talking about his dad, like his nurse holding a newspaper over his head so he doesn't get his face wet as they wheel him into the ambulance. That must be a recollection from him.
It seems very likely, yeah.
Yeah, all right. Well, I suppose what we must do is we must talk about how the main plot resolves, really, because it's a bit like watching a Columbo episode for me, and you watch a Columbo episode and you see him hounding one person particularly, but then at the end, it would be like if in a Columbo episode at the end, suddenly someone you'd seen in the background in one scene suddenly turned out to be the murderer.
Yeah.
It's like if the guy who sold him a bowl of chili turned out to be the murderer or something like that. Go on, let's talk about who done it then. I'm baffled.
Well, yeah, it seems perhaps that's what doesn't help. It just seems fairly preposterous, doesn't it? So you've got a guy who was married and then he gets divorced. So he has, and he gets married to his mistress, and then he is having an affair with somebody else, and she is the first person to get killed. And then the second person to get killed is the current wife, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then the third person to get killed is the ex-wife.
Yeah, the first wife.
And then, does anybody get killed after that? I can't remember.
No, I think that's it. It's noted when he's killed that his dog is also killed, and there's quite a lot of just sort of mention of the dog and why would anyone kill the dog, and so that you kind of you click that must be somehow significant.
And the other weird thing is that the will is a bit peculiar in that the estate's divvied up between the two daughters of the first marriage, so obviously that puts them under a bit of suspicion. But then randomly he gives £10,000 to a vet, and then the woman who gave him the dog, which seems a bit weird.
Not even the woman who worked at the pet shop where his wife bought the dog.
Oh yeah, And so they obviously go and see her, and obviously she's like, "Oh my God, this is so unbelievable. He's so generous. I only ever met him." But, So that's a bit preposterous as well. Also preposterous is her stupid... There's a lot of letters in this book as well.
Oh,
another thing that he's sex pesty stuff he puts in the books around this time.
Just recently, he seems to find an excuse to write some kind of like little pornographic bits every single book, doesn't he? It's we could have done without that, really.
So these letters are signed. That's the main thing we've not talked about, actually, in a classic 87th Precinct confusion, in that they take for granted when these letters date from the get-go, and they don't realise that they've got the wrong year. And because they got the wrong year, they got the wrong person.
Yeah.
They think it's from one person, and yet it's from another. And these letters... So they're reading the letters that have been sent to and from, and yet they're not in total response to one another, are they? And these letters are signed by, which... Yeah,
it's like hi and bye, aren't they, at the start and end? So they assume they're just anonymous.
Yeah, but then this by is actually this person's nickname, which... You wouldn't sign off your letter just with your name and an exclamation mark after it, would you? It just all seemed very contrived, that.
I'm fairly sure no one has ever had the nickname Bye and signed their letters by just saying bye. But,
No.
But there we go.
So yes, and it was obviously the Columbo where the spoiler alert, lady at the pet shop.
Yeah,
who
it turns
just
out.
was insanely jealous and
Yeah.
then just went a bit mad and started killing everybody
yeah.
else and him.
One of a succession of dazzlingly beautiful, the glamorous blonde ladies who inexplicably falls head over heels in love with this old geezer for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he just doesn't hang together.
No, although I will say, to give him his due, when you actually look at the mechanism of how he puts the story together, because you do see from the perpetrator's point of view occasionally, and actually I was looking through it, and one of the things you don't know is it a man or a woman? And when you're reading how he puts together those bits with the point of view of the perpetrator and stuff, it's very skillfully done how he avoids giving it away, which is the art of a mystery writer, I suppose. And he obviously gets that very well.
It is, and I went back to the first one and read it again, and it is very, very well done. But it's so well done that you just absolutely therefore know it's a woman.
Yes,
you know what I mean? So it kind of backfires a little bit. I don't know. He kind of does it once, and then he does it again, and then he does it again, and it's so obviously gender neutral that you just think, this has just got to be a female perpetrator.
He does throw in a bit of misdirection with the guy in the antique shop, doesn't he? Just to throw us off the scent a little bit. Who's a moderately entertaining character.
Yeah, but not hilarious.
No.
We're missing any big hilarity in this book, really.
Yeah, and he's not done that for a little while now, has he?
He just doesn't seem to be in the mood.
From what I've read in interviews as well, he wasn't in the mood. He found the period very dark, and so his writing became very dark.
Well, it's certainly true the last few, isn't it? He's painting like the city and the people in a very negative light, really. But I think sometimes it comes off better than it did in this entry, I would say.
Yeah. Right. Okay then. Well, we'll get towards summing up, and I'll before we do that though, I'll give you a couple of contemporary reviews. And I didn't find many reviews online for this. I'm sure there's plenty out there, but I can't necessarily get access to all of them. But I have got one from Marilyn Stasio in the New York Times from the 10th of February 1991. And it opens with the stark title of Ed McBain's new police procedural, Widows, Morrow, $19, says it all. Men are murdered and women weep, unless, of course, one of the widows did the dirty deed herself. Well, quite a lot of women are murdered as well, Marilyn, so... Of course they are. It's a crime book. It's, women are victims. It's the problem you get with some of these sometimes. Yeah, like Carella's mother notwithstanding, the characters do not inspire much sympathy, since they are only slightly less materialistic and self-catering than their dearly departed. Even the normally compassionate cops are more touched by the fate of poor Amos, the sweet-tempered lab retriever. But then, she goes on, if the author can't work us up over these odious citizens, he does his usual brilliant job of making human beings out of hard-bitten policemen. She talks about how the bit with Eileen Burke finally works her way out of psychotherapy and into hostage work, a career move that loosens Mr. McBain's formidable skill at descriptive procedures and occasions the novel's best action scenes. Crying's fine, but there's nothing like a tense hostage situation for grabbing one's total attention. So, that agrees with us, I think.
Yeah, pretty spot on.
Okay, and once I've zoomed in on this one, because I seem to have put it on the page really, really small... Come on, Zoom. So this is a British review. This is from the Daily Mail on the 21st of February 1991. McBain junkies are not kept waiting long for a fix. It is fewer than 6 months since Vespers, the last 87th Precinct novel, was published. And now, bingo, here's another. How does he do it? My theory is that he is as compulsive about writing his thrillers as his legion of fans is about reading them. One of the chief qualities is that he is a very moral writer as well as an intelligent one. His fictitious city, based on New York, is brilliantly evoked, not only as an inferno where the cops can only hope to skim the surface of the horrors within, but also as a vital backdrop to modern life, where, against all odds, hope and humour spring eternal. I don't really know that they do.
Not so much just at this era.
No. You don't come away with a song in your heart, do you?
No.
But yeah, Widows has all the hallmarks of vintage McBain: cracking plot, pace, style, wit, authenticity, and serious intent. The author apparently thinks it is his best yet. I think I agree with him. Well, he's going to say that, isn't he? To be fair.
Yeah, he's going to say this is my 19th best entry.
Yeah. He's going to refer to his own Kenneth.
Yeah, this one's all right, but I'd recommend you read one from earlier.
All right. Okay, then. Well, we better get to summing up and scoring. And I think I will come to Steve-O first for this, if you would be so kind.
Well, yes, I think I've made my thoughts clear, haven't I? So I don't suppose there's that much point in repeating those. Yeah, a bit of a frustrating entry, really. Good bits. Definitely the end is the by far the most engaging, and obviously the plot with Eileen and Bert and the her new career in the hostage team. Now, I've not been sent the Kenneth scores, which is
sorry,
makes any accurate
you have to do it
scoring
blind.
Very difficult. But yeah, I'm going. What am I going? I'm going 55. I think it's a 5.5.
Oh, right,
10.
okay. Oh, well, I better go to Morgan then.
Well, I mean, I do agree with all of the points you've made about it. There's that main plot does not hold the interest like some of the plots will, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. I did still really enjoy it. I feel like it's important to stress that it was still a very enjoyable read. I'm going to go a bit higher. I think it's more like a 64 Police Shields.
Right, okay. And as I am the first time reader of this, I will say, I mean, just in a tiny bit of Kenneth summary, the last two we did, Vespers we got 64, Lullaby got 62, and I think it was better than those for me, mainly because the set pieces were so good, and they mainly were the ones with Eileen Burke and the ending. So I'm not super keen. I like the fact that it's, like I say, you can see some really good McBain craftsmanship in it, and it does kick us off into the 90s books of the series, I think. There's a couple I've not read coming up as well again.
Ooh.
So, and I know this has, but I do know that this has implications and it is referred back to, particularly the Carella father, case.
Indeed.
And yeah, so I think I would probably go, I think I'm just going to go for a solid 60 Police Shields. And that gives us a grand Kenneth total of,
60.
with some rounding down, of course, to 59.
Oof.
So,
I feel like it's a little harsh, but your Kenneth has spoken.
yeah, I mean, it does put it down the bottom end of things, but it puts it above Ghosts, 80 Million Eyes and Lightning.
Well,
so,
fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a bit of a shame. I think, if I was just awarding the ending a score, it would be up in the 80s probably, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's very hard to look past the notion of not really giving a damn about anyone in it and having to suffer reading the porny letters.
Yeah, if you were gonna, throw somebody a book out of your collection, I'm fairly sure this would be one of the last bunch you'd go to. I think you would suggest a hell of a lot more of the other entries before this one.
This is true.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, we've summed that up anyway, and the next book in the series, Any Road, is Kiss.
Cool.
Yes, Kiss. Oh, and I'll tell you what I should mention, actually, before we go, and I should have done this at the top of the show, but I will just point out as well that the publishers for this were William Morrow & Co. in hardback in America, Avon in softback in America, and it's Heinemann in the UK and Mandarin, as the past couple of books have been, just to keep everyone on track where we are with publishers. No changes just yet, but there'll be more coming. Right, like I say, next one is Kiss, and we will be back with our bonus episode. So until then, I'm going to say ta-ra, and Steve-O.
Goodbye.
And Morgan.
Fairly well.